Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we have the fourth part of the Australia tutorial series, so go ahead and check out the first three parts if you're so inclined. They cover some of the more basic tips, and today we're going to be going on over some quite advanced ones that me and some other people have developed while we've been running the Australia State Streak record. So this first one here is the plates that Australian new drivers are legally obliged to put on their cars. So L stands for learner and P stands for provisional. And all Australian states, new drivers have to put these on their car front, on their windows, and they're different colours in different states. So the most important thing to say is that Victoria and Western Australia use solid green for the P2s, and New South Wales and Queensland use the solid white with a green text for the P2s, whereas some of the other states, such as South Australia and Tasmania, don't actually use green Ps at all. Alright, here's another map I made, which is just again of the Australian number plates, and just highlighting the different way they look. So it's a good little map, good little resource for it. Finally, I have a no stopping sign comparison. So as you can see, New South Wales is the only state to use the all red no stopping sign, and these signs are quite common, so it's worth looking for, and I'll show you them right now. So here we are in New South Wales, and you can see that we have this P plate with the little speed sign on it. So let's go back here. You can see that normally New South Wales is the only one that has a speed sign on the bottom right or the top right, and that stipulates how fast a P plater is allowed to drive. So you can actually see that here we are in Sydney. So there you go. Next up, we do have the normal no stopping sign. Here we are in Victoria. And obviously here we are in New South Wales, and you can see that it is the red version instead of a white version. So definitely worth keeping in mind, because even Canberra in the Australian Capital Territory, they do not use the red one. Alright, next up we have a state-specific clue. We are here in a Queensland school zone, and Queensland school zones use an orange outline, and a number of these warning signs that Queensland has use this orange outline, and they're the only state to do so. The next tip is the gaps along the outside of the road in South Australia, and South Australia is the only state to do this, so it's actually remarkably useful. And as soon as you see these gaps, they're pretty consistent and they kind of look like this, but when you see them and you're sure it's not just like a camera glitch, then you can safely say that you're in South Australia. Okay, here we are in Victoria, and you can see that we've got this Victorian blue reflector bollard to tell you that there's a drain there. Well, in Melbourne, they use the white squares with a blue square within, and that also is meant to point to a drain, and this one is unique to Melbourne. I think you may be able to find it outside in Victoria, but basically only found in Melbourne, so very good to know, and will actually get you around pretty frequently, I'd say. This green sign is not something I've talked about before on the channel, but it will tell you the abbreviation of the next town, and also that's in 140 kilometers. So no, they're not specific to any state, but you can use them to, if you're on a no moving game, perhaps work out what the name of that town is that's coming up, and it's just an abbreviation. Alright, next up we have another state-specific clue, and this one is the New South Wales double red bollards. So they're not always round reflectors, they can be rectangular ones too, but when you see a double red bollard, in my experience, it's always been in New South Wales. Next up, we have this fat black and white arrow, and it's often found in slip lanes, and in my experience, I've only ever seen it in Queensland. And so in my video with Wolf Tracker, we had one of these, and it was able to give us the round for Queensland, and there was also a normal one next to it. But yeah, in Queensland, the fat ones are much more common, and I think the fat ones are only found in Queensland, this variety here. Alright, next up, we have a bit of an obvious one, but it pays to know that on the bottom of some Victorian signs, it can say Vic Roads. And so if you see Vic Roads, well, obviously you're in Victoria. That's the only state that will use a Vic Roads sign. Alright, next up we are in the Northern Territory, up near Darwin, and I have found that very often in the Northern Territory there will be a little yellow marking on a sign, And yes, this little yellow marking halfway down, it can be a bit longer, it can be a bit shorter. It doesn't 100% mean that you're in the Northern Territory, but it is very common in the Northern Territory, and probably more common than any other state or territory, in my opinion. We are here in Victoria, and this light, which is, this size, so you can see that is it in relation to everything else. It's long, and it's kind of looks like a fluorescent light, and this light bulb is Victoria only, and it's long. And Dennis showed me that one, so thank you, Dennis. Alright, next up we can see some maroon coloured bins here. Now, as I've said in other videos, the bin colour of Australia is normally like a darker one, normally like a black or a dark green. However, these maroon bins are quite common in Tasmania, and you can possibly get them in Victoria as well. So that's the only two places I've seen them, and definitely more common in Tasmania. Alright, next up we have a heavy vehicle here, and you can see that this heavy vehicle has a blue strip at the bottom of the number plate. So Western Australia would have a blue strip at the top, but yes, a lot of blue vehicles, and this is a new kind of number plate, so you can see we're in Gen 4, it's recent coverage. But yes, a lot of heavy vehicles in Australia, the whole country wide, will use this blue strip. Alright, next up we have a highway or property marker, which is a South Australian one. I think I showed a similar version of these in another video, but this is another variant for South Australia. And I believe, this is not 100% confirmed, but I believe that this is the Western Australian variant. So it's green instead of white. Next up, we are here in Queensland, and you can see that this traffic light has a fluorescent band on it. It's fluorescent yellow. In New South Wales, this would be a darker yellow, as I covered in the last video. Now, one thing that's worth mentioning is that all over Australia, they tend to do these different ways, and often at a set of traffic lights, you'll have one that is yellow, and then all the rest will not be yellow at all. But basically, it's inconsistent, apart from the fact that New South Wales and Queensland use these bands around it, and that Queensland's is fluorescent and New South Wales is a darker yellow. So that is all you got to keep in mind, really. Alright, next up, we are in a 40 area here in Queensland, and we do have the speed written on the ground. Likewise, here we are in Melbourne with the speed written on the ground too. And so all I have to say about this is that it is much, much more common for New South Wales to write the speed on the ground than other states. However, you can find it in Queensland and Victoria, and probably other places too. It is just remarkably more common in New South Wales. And also, this entrance to the road that's red with a yellow around it, that's quite common in Queensland, I would say, and not so common elsewhere. Okay, we are still in Queensland, and this sign is blue and white, striped all the way up, and I've only ever seen this in Queensland. It seems to be quite rare, and I'm not exactly sure what it would mean, but yes, I think this is Queensland exclusive. Tell me otherwise if you think not. Here we are in Western Australia, and this stripy bollard, as far as I can tell, is Western Australian exclusive, and it's quite rare, but if you do see it, you should be in WA. Alright, next up we have Western Australian pole stickers and pole markings. There are a number of ones which I didn't cover in the last video, so here are some of them. So if you have the Indonesian or the Polish flags, red and yellow, on your pole, that should be a good indication that you're in Western Australia. Don't think that's ever failed me. Likewise, this sticker here with the white and then grey and then white seems to be a Western Australian thing. And this metal thing at the bottom of the pole is by no means Western Australian exclusive, but is common in WA, I would say. And finally, this white sticker, which often has a yellow bit in the middle, is very common in Western Australia, and I would say Western Australian exclusive, basically. Here we are at a New South Wales school zone. You can see it's got a 40 kilometers per hour written in yellow, and all these triangles along the side of the road, that is New South Wales exclusive. And here we are in Sydney, and I just wanted to mention that in a previous video, I said that black and yellow chevrons in an urban context are less common in Australia, but I do think that in Queensland and New South Wales they're a bit more common. Also, I've definitely noticed in New South Wales that they put a speed sign on the back of buses, although I do think they do that sometimes elsewhere as well, but not in South Australia where I live, so I thought that was interesting. Alright, next up we are in New South Wales again here, and in this parking lot they've got yellow arrows. And I will just say that in Queensland and New South Wales you'll see this, whereas in the other states I dare say these arrows would be white. Certainly in South Australia where I live, these arrows would be white. And here in South Australia, at the top of Stobie poles you often have this trident shape, and I have found that this pattern of trident is unique to South Australia, and if this Stobie pole was way in the distance, I couldn't quite tell that it was a Stobie pole, I might still be able to see this trident shape and be able to guess South Australia as opposed to WA or Victoria or something because of this pattern, so it can actually be quite useful. A few of my viewers pointed out that there are actually some Stobie poles out way up north in Western Australia, and while this certainly is an odd-looking Stobie pole, it's very thin compared to what you'd normally see in South Australia. I think this actually might be one, and we're actually up here in Wyndham in Western Australia, so I'll show you where that is on the map now, but you can see quite a few of these Stobie pole-looking poles up here, and as opposed to the Northern Territory poles, and so that is right there on the border of the Northern Territory, and actually all through here you can see the Northern Territory holy poles, and you can actually see them even on this side of the border. For example, in Mount Isa they have them too, so good to keep in mind. Although they're a bit different, they still use the metal poles. Here we are in Western Australia, and you can see that this bollard has a yellow reflector, which indicates that it's on the inside of the highway. And I was wrong in my other video. I said these were exclusive to New South Wales, but it turns out that they're absolutely not. You can find them in WA, Victoria, and Queensland at least. I think in Tasmania too. So I think it's just maybe even in South Australia too. So just not a correct clue. I still think they might be more common in New South Wales, but yeah, you can find these everywhere in Australia. So nothing special. I was mentioning to Eddie and Dennis that I was going to make this video. Both of them are in my Discord and are the two highest scoring Australia players for Australia State Streaks at this point in time. And they both mentioned bus stops as something being worth mentioning, so I'm going to give you a quick rundown right now. The major cities in Australia, Perth, Adelaide, Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, can be separated by the different colours found on the bus stops. So for example, here we have the Perth bus stop, which often contains green, and the Perth one here is a separate little pole next to the bus stop. In Adelaide, they either use a red for the go zones, or normally a yellow, and it'll be a yellow pole, or maybe sometimes a Stobie pole will be painted yellow as well. In Queensland, they have this long arch, which the pole will be normally white or yellow, and the arch is wider than ones found in New South Wales, and this is for pretty much the whole of Queensland, and then this is the equivalent in New South Wales. Although New South Wales doesn't only use this, it actually also uses different styles. This would be the other New South Wales style that you would see. Then of course, as I've shown in other videos, you've got the Victorian one, which is pretty easy to identify. It's white and orange. In this location, we've got two very typically Perth things. We have this red brick, and such a dark red brick is very common on the pavement, and it can also be a strip in the middle of the road in Perth. And also, we have this sloped curb, and yeah, as you can see over here, it's quite sloped, and in all the other major cities in Australia, it's more common to have a 90-degree angle curb, but yes, almost always sloped in Perth. And now this is not a foolproof hint. In fact, most cities at least have some suburbs that have curved ones, but the curb is normally 90-degree angle elsewhere. Next up, we are in the Northern Territory, and you can see we've got an all-white bollard here. So I've often noticed in the Northern Territory that the right-hand side of the road bollard will not have a grey section. This is by no means a reliable hint, but just an observation I've had, so that could help you get that it's in Northern Territory every now and again. Next up, I want to talk about how they bolt speed signs. In New South Wales, it's common to have the bottom bolt here and the top bolt inside the circle of the speed sign. Next up, in Queensland, we can see that both of the bolts on this little speed sign are inside the circle. Then, in another Queensland example, we can see the bolts being here and here. Now, in New South Wales, you'd have the bolt here, generally speaking, but this is only a general rule. It cannot be applied too broadly. Here we are in Victoria, and you can see that the bolt is on the top and the bottom, but in Victoria you can also get the bolt above the 50, like in New South Wales. Here we are in South Australia as well, and in South Australia, it is very common to have the bolts on the red lines, and you know what? It's not going to be a terribly reliable clue, but sometimes in a really hard location, you could start to think about that kind of thing. Alright, here we are in New South Wales for one of the last tips of the videos, and you can see that we've got some maroon coloured bollards here, and these bollards I have only ever seen in New South Wales, although perhaps maybe you could find them in Tasmania too. I'm not really sure, but worth keeping in mind, we are here in the Snowy Mountains, so I'll show you where these bollards were. They were right near Canberra. And just to finish out the video, we have a few more Google cars. So this one is a Pirawira Conservation Park car. It is definitely unique, definitely different to any other national park car I've seen in Australia, and it's just got this big white front. And Pirawira Conservation Park is right here in the Barossa Goldfields, so up here, so a bit northeast of Adelaide, and here we are in Punululu National Park, which is in Western Australia, and that one is characterized by this very distinct antenna on the left-hand side, although the landscape could give it away too. And this one is over here in Western Australia. It is, yeah, near the border with Northern Territory, near Halls Creek. Alright, so that is it for the video, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this video, and I'm going to be bringing a new one soon. It is going to be a states comparison and basically an introduction to getting into the state streaking community, and you'll definitely want to keep your eyes peeled for that one. So like and subscribe, go back and watch the first ones in the series if you haven't, and yeah, I hope you guys are going well and you enjoyed the video. So until next time, peace.